We are now just over 2 weeks away from the release of Legends Z-A, and I'm so excited to play the game after over a year of hype videos, theory videos, community polls, and streams where we've been talking non-stop about all the possibilities. And with all the recent reveals, trailers, and new mega evolutions, I can't help but think about the story that's taking shape, and it's got me wondering what might come after Legends Z-A. The Legends series is definitely just that, a series. We don't know yet how many Legends games they plan to make, but it doesn't seem like it's going to stop after Z-A. Maybe it will end up being a trilogy, meaning there's one more left to come out a few years down the line, or maybe it's a continuous series with multiple entries effectively starting a Legends sequence of generations. If Legends Arceus is Legends Gen 1 and Z-A is Legends Gen 2, then the question on my mind is what makes sense for Legends Gen 3? Well, I think I might have some ideas as to what the Pokémon company are planning next. So in today's video, we're going to explore the reasons why Legends Z-A could actually be setting up a huge storyline for the next Legends game, taking place in either Johto, Unova, or both. Hit the subscribe button if you enjoyed today's theory, and thank you as always to our members for powering another video. There are just a few days left before we announce the winner of the Legends Z-A copy giveaway on Monday, October the 6th. So hit the join button to be automatically entered and become a member today. So firstly, why am I implying that Z-A is a prelude? It's a full-scale release, and they're charging us full price to play it, plus extra for the DLC. So what do I actually mean by this? Well, let's look at this through the eyes of Game Freak and the Pokémon company. I do think Z-A is going to feel like a full-scale game when it comes to story, features, and gameplay, but the scale of the location itself is far smaller than all the other main series Switch games, and that shows us that the process and ambition of building locations in the Pokémon world in general is changing for Game Freak. It seems like they're kind of going through a rethinking process right now, particularly as we move on to the Switch 2 hardware. And I think that's because regions like Galar and Paldea, whilst they had decently sized maps, felt a bit lifeless and empty compared to the feeling of the handheld Pokémon games. The size was there, but the focused interactivity was not, epitomized by how there are so many buildings that you can't enter in Paldea, something that just doesn't fly in a 3D entry to the main series. So in Z-A, it seems they're packing more detail into a dense city landscape to try and make the world feel contained but more alive. But I don't think that's the only reason this game takes place in one city. As we approach the game's release, it still seems that Lumiose City will truly be the sole location where everything takes place. Even the DLC seems to suggest that Hoopa's portals will lead to a place called Hyperspace Lumiose, likely just an alternative version of the very same Lumiose City we will have already been playing in for the entire base game. I've theorized that later in the game, we could go on to some isolated parts of other cities in other regions like Cerulean and Castelia, but it's true that Nintendo have officially said that the game takes place entirely in Lumiose. Now personally, I don't think anybody's going to complain if they tell us a white lie about the game in order to exceed our expectations. Metal Gear Solid 5, Resident Evil 7, and even Super Mario Odyssey to some degree concealed big parts of the game during promotion. Scarlet and Violet never mentioned Kitakami and the Unova and Blueberry Academy as DLC locations until deep into the release cycle. And even back in Gen 2's promotional campaign, there was not a single mention that after completing the Johto story, you could go back to Kanto and explore the entire region 3 years later. But for argument's sake, let's assume that Lumiose City truly is the sole location of Z-A. That would mean that the actual scale of this game has been massively reduced compared to what we're used to for a full main series release on the Switch. Lumiose City was just one of 16 cities in X and Y, and that's not even taking into account over 20 connecting routes between them. So in essence, this game focuses on just one of 16 cities, or one of around 40 unique locations in X and Y. Now with that being said, Lumiose has clearly been somewhat upscaled and broadened in Z-A to make it a suitable setting for a home console game. Plus the resolution has been increased and we have rooftop and underground areas to flesh out the environment. But many of those who played the recent 1-hour demo continued to report boxy corridor environments, at least in the early part of the game. And that begs the simple question, why has Game Freak gone in this direction, condensing an entire game setting to one single city? There are many plausible explanations for this, from poor development practice, small development teams, or internal deadlines not allowing for enough time to build a region in high res. The truth is probably a blend of many reasons, but here's one major consideration that could have been at least part of the reason. Could it be that Legends Z-A was a fairly last-minute idea that was pivoted to after the backlash that Scarlet and Violet received? The base Gen 9 games were hugely criticised on release for their vast, barren areas, poor region design with copy and pasted textures, uninteresting environments, frustrating navigation, buildings you mostly can't even enter, and overall poor execution. The game looked and felt like rushed chaos in a lot of places, and though the blow was softened by a much improved Switch 2 update, Gen 9 will always be remembered for looking absolutely awful, being glitchy upon release, and being way off on a technical level compared to its peers. You can get away with that once, maybe twice, but over 2 or 3 generations, that's going to start to damage the brand and reputation no matter how big and successful it is, even if people are still in love with the characters and the merch continues to sell. Just look at what's happening with Star Wars right now. So did the Pokemon Company see this reaction to Gen 9 and then change up their plans fairly last minute? Well, I think that's very plausible, and focusing on a single city would be a pretty good strategy if that was the case, assuming that they pull Z-A off and people like it. This is a particularly interesting line of thinking when you consider that nobody was expecting to go back to Kalos before we saw Unova and Johto again. And with the awkward transition period between the Switch 1 and Switch 2 hardware, maybe they wanted to strip it down and focus on making a contained, gameplay-focused game to get us through the transition period, rather than building out another massive map for the Switch 1 that likely would have aged very quickly. We know that Game Freak have multiple teams developing multiple games simultaneously, so it could even be that a full-scale Kalos game was in the early stages, planned for several years down the line perhaps, for Gen 11 or Gen 12. But then, perhaps Lumiose became a real focus because they felt unable to release a full-fledged Johto or Unova game in the state it was in, and the nostalgia opportunity for Gen 2 and Gen 5 is far bigger than Gen 6, although there is Mega Evolution and we'll come on to that. But whatever the reason is for them focusing on Lumiose as a setting for an entire game, this is why I think that Johto and Unova games are being more passionately built in the background. In fact, I've done a whole video on how Johto and Unova have been massively teased since Legends Arceus. Arceus relied on Johto and Unova Pokemon for nearly all of its Hisuian forms and evolutions. It also added a new historic alternative to Scizor and added to the Unovan Genie trio. And then Scarlet and Violet included several new Johto and Unova evolutions, and most of the Paradox Pokemon were versions of Johto and Unova Pokemon too, all before the DLC took us to one of Johto's neighbouring regions and a Unova Academy. So the company most certainly had those regions in mind during both Gen 8 and Gen 9's development, and yet we're going to Lumiose City. So whether it was a pivot or whether it was always planned to subvert everybody's expectations, I'm sure there was always a follow-up game planned for Gen 9, and I think that was always going to be a Legends game of some sort. But the fact that they decided to downsize their map drastically from a full-scale region to one single city is just kind of suspicious. It tells us that for whatever reason, they weren't confident enough to tackle designing an entire region again in the Gen 9 engine. And whatever that reason is, the facts are clear. Focusing on a smaller map generally means a smaller development timescale, likely freeing up staff to build larger scale Gen 10 games. Plus, we had the 2024 gap year that meant the gap between Gen 9 and 10 is likely going to be around 4 years, again allowing for more development time. So to conclude this point from the development perspective, I think Z-A was born out of 2 major things. Firstly, the fact that they needed more time to build proper Switch 2 games for Gen 10, Unova, and Johto. And secondly, when they were thinking of a way to give us a game without having to deliver a full-scale Johto or Unova yet, the commercial opportunity to reintroduce Mega Pokemon and deliver the Pokemon Z game that we never got on the 3DS would have been a very tempting option, allowing them to align Mega lore with future games, allowing them to experiment with environments and battle mechanics in a smaller scale game, and it also allowed them to do something that they like to do, subvert expectations. So all in all, the timing probably just felt right to them. So we've explored from a development perspective why the next Legends game will likely be bigger in scale, and we've touched on the heavy teasing during Gen 8 and 9 of concepts, characters, and Pokémon found in Johto and Unova. But then there's the actual story of Legends Z-A. Now, just to preface this, we don't know how the full story is going to play out. The game isn't out yet, so all we have to go off are trailers, hints, and some of the leaks that so far have been pretty accurate. It may not seem obvious that the Legends series has its own continuous plot, but it seems to me there is an overarching theme, and the stories will tie together. Life only makes sense backwards, and when 3 or 4 Legends games have been released, this will be much more clear. But broadly, it seems to me that the Legends series is dealing with the lore behind Arceus's infinity energy. In the first Legends game, we saw the noble Pokémon and the gold glow, which seems to be the direct blessed infinity energy of Arceus. But there are more complicated expressions of that same infinity energy that we see across the Pokémon games through different battle mechanics. Mega Evolution is one, Z-moves, Terastallizing, and Gigantamax are others. We now even have the Omni Ring coming in Pokémon Champions that allows us to use any of them. And in future gens, I'm sure we'll have plenty more. But I think the Legends series is designed to deal with those higher stake, fundamental plot points from a lore perspective, stemming from Arceus's design of the Pokémon universe and how time has unfolded overall. And the only 2 regions out of all 9 that has not been shown with any kind of Arceus's infinity energy are Johto and Unova. But have there been any specific hints in the Z-A promo material that suggest Johto and Unova lore is coming? Well, kind of. Z-A seems to take place some time after X and Y. In fact, it pretty much feels like both are set in the present relative to when the games came out. Now, recently I posted one of my favourite theories I've ever done, and it was about Lugia and Ho-Oh being subliminally linked to the original dragon, the XY box art legendaries, and Arceus. I spoke about their overall role being less clear than many other box art legendaries historically, that they felt more like saintly Pokemon that haven't had their backstory, their purpose fully explained. Feel free to check out that video as it goes into much more detail, but the core concept is this. Lugia and Ho-Oh were new creations to balance the raw power of Xerneas and Yveltal. When Arceus saw the ultimate weapon fueled by their life and death energy rain down and disturb the balance of life, Arceus then birthed 2 new Pokemon, Ho-Oh, the Phoenix Pokemon, with the power to restore life, and Lugia, the diving guardian of the seas, with the power to restrain chaos with its psychic abilities. The theory goes on to connect them to the original dragon and the Unovan legendaries. If the original dragon, unsplit and in its true form, is part of the Creation Dragon Quartet and is the Pokemon that represents the fundamental state of plasma and the elements, then Lugia was blessed with the power to control those elements, hence why it's the master of the legendary birds. And it works together with Ho-Oh, who itself created more grounded elemental legendaries as it revived 3 fallen Pokemon, turning them into Suicune, Entei, and Raikou. Assuming that Lugia truly is this Pokemon blessed with the power to contain chaos, then it would make sense why Lugia was depicted as the main rival to Unbound Hoopa in the 18th Pokémon movie. Hoopa is of course the poster child of the Mega Dimension DLC. Its powers create hoops that seemingly can transport us between dimensions, and as we discussed in our last theory video, Hoopa has an almighty powerful Unbound form. Hoopa in this form is depicted as a Pokemon that can not only unleash but also overpower various legendary Pokemon. In Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, its hoops were scattered across islands around Hoenn, and when we interacted with those hoops, legendary Pokemon emerged to attack us. And in the movie, Hoopa is split into 2 entities, a powerful, unbound spirit contained within a prism bottle, and Hoopa's basic confined form, which is a more friendly version of it. When the spirit is accidentally unleashed, it tries to possess the confined form of Hoopa to restore its true power. The good version of Hoopa instinctively summons one particular Pokemon to protect itself and the group of trainers in the movie from the unbound spirit, and that Pokemon is the Johto legendary Lugia. So if Lugia was created by Arceus to contain chaos, it makes sense that Lugia would be the one Pokemon that has a real beef with Hoopa, or whoever may be trying to unleash its terrifying unbound power. Lugia is all about containing and concealing unchecked power. Pokédex entries even tell us how it hides itself away in an ocean cave to conceal its raw strength. And I think that's why the 18th movie very intentionally shows Lugia as the main rival to Unbound Hoopa, because Lugia has a divine duty to contain that power. In the DLC, I suspect that someone is going to be trying to unleash Hoopa's true unbound form for some greater purpose. And the professor in this game is Mabel, in the apparent absence of Professor Sycamore. Mabel was once a member of the evil Team Flare, and she was specifically obsessed with raw, untapped power latent within living beings like Pokémon. She has a hoop hairstyle, and in Z-A, she also has a shirt with hoops on it, possibly subtle hints towards her relation to Hoopa. So her being the one that is secretly wanting to unleash Hoopa and use it for some evil cause, I think is very possible. And whatever the major plot point in the Mega Dimension DLC is, I think we're clearly going to see a focus on Hoopa having this ability to transport between dimensions, likely between Mega and non-Mega timelines, but even just between different regions in one universe. And this could be a perfect way to tease the idea of Mega Evolution in a future Johto game. Now, if someone has the prism bottle in Z-A and manages to unleash Hoopa's unbound form, according to the Hoopa movie, Lugia would be the main arch nemesis that tries to contain it. Now, I don't think we're going to see an actual full Lugia plot in Z-A, but depending on how it all ends with Hoopa's story arc, we could certainly get an Easter egg where Lugia is either summoned by the good version of Hoopa to protect everybody from the unbound spirit just like it did in the movie, or Lugia could come independently to contain the raw threat of unbound Hoopa. During this moment, it might open up a portal between Johto and Hoopa's Mega Dimension, which we've seen in the teaser is where a lot of the Mega Stones are stored. At some point, Lugia could get sent back to its resident Johto region via a Hoopa portal, in turn unleashing Mega Stones and Mega Energy into the Johto region. Just like it's totally possible the hoops around the Hoenn region in Oras are the reason that Mega Evolution started occurring in that region too. In fact, this unleashing of Mega Stones into Johto might have already happened. The only regions that have had Mega Evolution depicted on their soil are Kalos, where Hoopa was introduced, Hoenn, where Hoopa left a load of portals, and Kanto, which is the direct neighbouring region of Johto. In fact, they can kind of be considered one region, sharing a Pokémon League and many towers that could serve as roosting spots for Lugia and Ho-Oh. In Let's Go, which takes place in Kanto, trainers can use the Mega Evolution technique in battle, so maybe Hoopa's presence is essential for the widespread Mega Evolution phenomenon to occur in any one region, or even in any one timeline. Once its portals arrive, Mega Energy seeps out from the Mega Dimension and begins a region-wide Mega Evolution phenomenon. So Lugia and Hoopa's unbound spirit having beef could be the seed of the plot of the next Legends game, where Johto has Mega Evolution fully intact region-wide. And couple this with my theory about the link between Johto and the Unova legendaries, and we might just have a Johto-Unova combined game that also features Mega Evolution. Click the link at the end of this video to see that theory in full, and let me know all of your thoughts down below. We're just 2 weeks away from the game now, and I cannot wait to play it with you guys and see what's in store. Until next time, love you gang.